Imagine finding, like, your absolute dream home. I mean, the perfect neighborhood, the ideal open concept layout, maybe some of that beautiful, 1950s architecture that's been meticulously updated.
Oh, yeah, the classic Florida bungalow vibe.
Exactly. And you have your down payment ready, you are totally pre-approved, you make a strong offer, and it's accepted.
Best feeling in the world.
Right. But then, out of nowhere, the entire deal just dies on the spot.
Brutal.
And it doesn't die because of, like, a hidden termite infestation or a sudden job loss or even a crazy bidding war. The deal dies because the roof on that house is 16 years old.
Yeah, that is a gut punch, but it is so common right now.
It is. And that's what we're getting into today. We are dissecting a really brutal, high-velocity real estate market where survival means, well, completely abandoning that traditional romanticized view of buying a house.
You really have to. You can't look at it as just a cozy home anymore.
Right. You have to look at it as like an aerodynamic fortress.
Well, it is a complete paradigm shift. The scenario you just described, it isn't some weird anomaly. It is the daily reality in markets that have shifted from these leisurely, predictable environments into hyper-competitive ecosystems.
Yeah.
Because when you're operating in a landscape where infrastructure, the environment, and massive demographic shifts all just violently collide, the margins for error completely vanish.
And that is precisely the terrain we are exploring in this deep dive. So we have this really fascinating piece of source material today.
It's a great read, very blunt.
Super blunt. It's a candid, entirely no-nonsense playbook published by a local real estate solutions firm operating right on the ground in Sarasota, Florida.
And we should clarify who these guys are.
Yeah, these are folks who specialize in distressed properties, inheritances, quick cash sales.
Yeah.
So, they aren't a tourism board trying to sell you on Gulf Coast Sunset.
No, not at all. They're
Yeah.
the people who get called in when a deal falls apart.
Exactly. When a buyer gets burned by a hidden repair, or a family realizes they bought into this massive logistical nightmare they can't afford, they see the autopsy of, like, every bad real estate transaction.
Which makes their perspective incredibly valuable. I mean, when you analyze a market through the lens of a distressed property buyer, you just strip away all the emotion.
Right, you stop caring about the paint colors.
You stop looking at the marble countertops and you start looking at the structural integrity, the insurance viability, and the really granular microeconomics of the zip code.
Yeah, and the mission for our deep dive today is to extract the strategic playbook from this document. It outlines exactly what families and first-time buyers need to survive a landscape that has, frankly, violently transformed from a quiet retirement haven into a fierce high-speed market.
And the visual they use to establish this transformation is just, it's striking.
I love that part. They tell you to stand at the corner of Main Street and Lemon Avenue in downtown Sarasota, look up, and just watch the construction crane swinging over the bay.
The secret is totally out.
It really is. Sarasota used to be the slow lane of Florida. You went there to retire, play some golf, enjoy the quiet. But now, it is operating with the intensity of a Wall Street trading floor.
It's nonstop. The sheer pace of decision-making required from a buyer right now is staggering.
And I want to say this is why this matters to you, the listener, even if you have absolutely zero intention of ever moving to Florida or stepping foot on a beach.
Oh, 100%.
This is a masterclass in how to read a shifting, hyper-competitive real estate market anywhere in the world.
Because what is happening in that specific county is basically a microcosm of a much larger national trend. It's this massive collision of inward migration and really finite supply.
Right.
The source material highlights this massive demographic shift, this huge influx of young, growing families into what was historically a sleepy retirement haven. And that demographic inversion completely rewrites the fundamental rules of supply and demand.
But how so? Because, I mean, a buyer is a buyer, right? Doesn't matter if they're 30 or 70, they still need a house.
Well, they do, but their pressure points are radically different.
Okay, what do you mean?
So a retiree downsizing from the Midwest might prioritize proximity to a golf course, single-story living so there are no stairs, and low maintenance.
Sure, easy living.
Right. And they generally have way more flexible timelines. They can wait 6 months for the right place. But when thousands of young working families flood a market simultaneously, The infrastructure strain is immediate.
Oh, because of schools and jobs.
Exactly. They demand A-rated school zones. They need proximity to employment hubs or major interstates. They require larger square footage for home offices and kids' rooms.
Yeah, you can't squeeze a family of 4 into a one-bedroom condo easily.
No, you can't. And crucially, they are often tied to really strict timelines. The start of a school year, a new job start date, or the end of a lease. That urgency creates that Wall Street trading floor intensity you mentioned.
They are competing fiercely for a very, very finite amount of space that actually meets those specific logistical needs. So to survive this battlefield, you first have to understand the terrain. You have to know where these families are actually placing their flags. Because, as the material points out, the glossy brochures selling the dream of walking to high-end downtown restaurants, well, they don't match the math of a first-time buyer.
Not even close. The inventory downtown simply doesn't fit the strict budget or the practical logistics of a growing family.
Right. So you have to look past the marketing. You have to examine what they call the topography of choice. Where is the actual volume of transactions happening for this demographic?
And the source breaks this down into highly specific archetypes, starting with the area they call the suburban heavyweight.
Palmer Ranch.
Yes, Palmer Ranch. It's located south of Clark Road, and it is a massive, sprawling collection of over 30 distinct neighborhoods.
30 distinct neighborhoods inside one development. That isn't just a subdivision. That is essentially a self-contained municipality.
It really is.
To me, it sounds like the fully stocked department store of real estate. You know exactly what you're getting, it's reliable, and it has a little bit of everything.
It is the absolute epitome of the master-planned community concept, which is a massive trend across the entire Sun Belt. Palmer Ranch was basically designed to balance price with predictable amenities.
Predictable being the key word there.
Exactly. The symbology here is risk mitigation for the buyer. When you buy into a master-planned community of that scale, you are buying environmental predictability.
You know there will be manicured sidewalks.
Right, community pools, and specific aesthetic standards enforced by homeowner associations. No one is going to suddenly paint their house neon green.
Right, right. And the source specifically notes its proximity to the Legacy Trail, which is a major recreational asset, and commercial hubs like the Westfield Sarasota Square Mall.
It's the suburban ideal. You trade the unique, eclectic vibe of an older city street for the guarantee that your neighborhood is going to look exactly the way it looks today for the next 20 years.
Yeah, and it's a straight shot to Siesta Keys, assuming the traffic cooperates, which is a massive caveat we will absolutely dissect later.
Oh, traffic is a whole other beast.
Right, but Palmer Ranch represents that safe, sprawling, predictable option. Then the text pivots to an area that represents the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Arlington Park.
Arlington Park. It's situated just east of the Tamiami Trail, and the authors label it the IT neighborhood.
This is where you see the mechanics of urban infill and rapid gentrification just playing out in real time.
The visual contrast they describe here is incredible. You have these classic low-slung 1950s Florida bungalows sitting literally right next door to brand new, towering, modern two-story builds.
It's a total architectural clash.
It is. To me, Arlington Park sounds like the hipster coffee shop of neighborhoods. It has this authentic, slightly gritty, historical vibe that everyone wants to get into before it becomes completely mainstream and sanitized.
That is a very, very accurate assessment of the neighborhood's life cycle. It is anchored by a significant public park with a lap pool and dog park.
Which is huge for young professionals.
Exactly. But the defining characteristic of Arlington Park, and the reason the source focuses on it so heavily, is the sheer velocity of the transactions.
The speed.
The text explicitly warns that real estate here moves at breakneck speed. If a property is listed on a Tuesday, it is highly likely to be under contract by Friday.
Listed Tuesday, pending Friday. Just think about the psychological pressure of that timeline.
It's intense.
If you are a buyer, you have zero time to casually deliberate. You cannot tour the house on Wednesday, turn to your spouse and say, let's sleep on it, maybe grab brunch on Sunday and see how we feel.
No, absolutely no.
Because by the time you wake up on Thursday, there were 3 cash offers, and the seller is calling for highest and best. You have to know going in that Arlington Park is your target, so when that 1950s bungalow pops up, you strike.
It requires an aggressive level of market preparation. I mean, if you are using those 3 days to decide if you even like the neighborhood, you have already lost.
Right, you're too late.
And this represents the clash between older zoning and modern demand. Those 1950s bungalows sit on relatively large lots by city standards.
Okay.
So you have buyers coming in, purchasing the bungalow purely for the land value, tearing it down, and erecting a massive modern two-story home.
Oh, wow. So it's not even about the house sometimes.
Exactly. That constant churn of development creates a hyper-competitive micro-market where speed is the absolute baseline for entry.
Okay, so you have the sprawling, predictable, suburban heavyweight of Palmer Ranch, and you have the fast-moving, eclectic urban infill of Arlington Park.
Right.
But then the source introduces a third distinct option that relies on a very specific physical characteristic, and that's the meadows.
Yes, the meadows.
They describe it as having 14 miles of walking trails, offering an antidote to the concrete jungle. But the phrase that really stood out to me is when they describe the homes as having character and settled foundations.
Yeah, settled foundations. That is a phrase loaded with structural and geological implications, especially in Florida.
Because they directly contrast this with what they call the hasty new construction, found much further out east near Interstate 75.
Right, the new builds.
So what is the actual tangible mechanical benefit of an older settled foundation versus a brand new untouched concrete slab? Because, intuitively a buyer usually thinks newer is always better.
Well, to understand why a distressed property firm values a settled foundation, you really have to look at the geology of coastal development.
Okay, lay it on me.
When a developer builds a massive new subdivision out east, they are often building on land that was recently agricultural or even, frankly, reclaimed swampland.
Swampland. That sounds stable.
Exactly. The water table is extremely high, so they bring in massive amounts of fill dirt to raise the elevation, grade the land, and then almost immediately pour massive concrete slabs on top of that disrupted earth.
So you are placing thousands of tons of concrete and wood framing onto soil that has just been violently rearranged.
Exactly. And over the first 5 to 10 years of that home's life, physics takes over. The ground is going to shift. The soil compacts under the weight of the structure.
That makes sense.
Plus, the water table fluctuates with the wet and dry seasons, causing the earth to constantly expand and contract. The house has to adapt to that environment. In a best-case scenario, this settling is minor.
Like what, a few cracks?
Yeah, maybe a few hairline cracks in the drywall or a door that sticks in the summer.
But if the construction was hasty, as the authors suggest happens out east,
Then that initial settling period can be catastrophic. If the soil wasn't properly compacted or the slab wasn't engineered for that specific lot's drainage, the settling leads to major structural failures.
or wow.
You get severe foundational cracking, plumbing lines beneath the slab can literally shear under the pressure, and roof trusses can shift out of alignment.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. The unknown variables are at their absolute peak on day one of a new build's life.
That fundamentally flips the way you evaluate age in a property. When the guide praises the settled foundations of a 30 or 40-year-old community like the Meadows, they're talking about proven environmental resilience.
Exactly.
That house has already endured decades of soil shifting, heavy rains, and settling. The ground beneath it is fully compacted. If there was a fatal flaw in how that slab was poured, it would have manifested 20 years ago.
Yes. You are trading the pristine, untouched appeal of a new build for the structural peace of mind that comes with age. It is a known entity.
It is a brilliant way to assess risk. And the source rounds out their mapping by briefly mentioning Southgate as another highly desirable central option, echoing those same consistent themes.
Right. Proximity to established amenities and the huge gravitational pull of those A-rated school zones.
But here's where the playbook takes a massive, really sobering turn. Because finding the perfect floor plan in the manicured streets of Palmer Ranch, or securing the coolest mid-century bungalow in Arlington Park, or even finding the most perfectly settled foundation in the Meadows,
None of it matters.
absolutely none of it matters if the physical structure carries a fatal financial flaw. We have to talk about the true sticker shock of this market.
This is the pivot from analyzing the aesthetics of a neighborhood to confronting the hard, unforgiving economics of the environment.
The source makes a jaw-dropping claim here. They state that in the Sarasota market, the barrier to entry isn't the list price of the home. It isn't even the mortgage interest rate.
Yeah.
The true sticker shock, the thing that kills deals and destroys budgets, is the volatile reality of property insurance.
And this is exactly where the local expertise of a distressed property firm really shines. I mean, a national generic real estate blog will tell a first-time buyer to calculate their mortgage, add in property taxes, and, leave a little buffer for maintenance.
Right. The standard advice.
But a firm operating on the ground in Florida knows that property insurance is the single most volatile, unpredictable, and expensive line item in your monthly carrying costs.
Wild.
The guide bluntly states that carriers are constantly pulling out of the state entirely, or they're spiking rates to levels that completely alter a buyer's debt-to-income ratio.
Which brings us back to that scenario we started with at the beginning of the deep dive. The guide offers a terrifying rule of thumb called the 15-year rule.
Yes, this is huge.
They warn buyers that when you are touring a home you love, you cannot wait for the formal inspection to ask about the age of the roof. You must ask the listing agent immediately.
Right there in the driveway.
Because if that roof is over 15 years old, securing an insurance policy is going to be a massive, potentially insurmountable hurdle.
And this completely upends traditional buying advice. Historically, the roof was just another item on the general inspector's checklist.
Yeah, you wouldn't even think about it up front.
Right. You get your offer accepted, you hire an inspector, they climb up on the roof a week later, check the granular loss on the shingles, and tell you, well, you probably have another 5 to 7 years left on this roof.
And then what?
Then you use that information to negotiate a small credit from the seller to offset those future replacement costs.
Right, you just treat it as a deferred maintenance issue.
Yeah.
But I really have to push back on this 15-year barrier because it feels incredibly arbitrary.
It does feel that way.
You were telling me that a roof installed exactly 15 years and 1 month ago, a roof that might look perfectly fine to the naked eye, a roof that hasn't leaked a single drop of water, that single month of age dictates whether I can get a 30-year mortgage on the property. How does that make any logical sense?
Well, it doesn't make sense from the perspective of the homeowner just standing in the driveway. But you have to view this through the lens of the institutions carrying the financial risk.
The insurance companies.
Exactly. This is driven entirely by actuarial realities and the global reinsurance market. In a coastal ecosystem like Florida, the building codes have evolved drastically, specifically in the wake of catastrophic events like Hurricane Andrew in the 90s and more recent storms.
Okay, so a 15-year-old roof wasn't just built 15 years ago. It was built to the specific engineering standards and building codes of 15 years ago, which are now considered obsolete by the risk modelers.
Precisely. Furthermore, the materials themselves, whether it's asphalt shingles or concrete tiles, have been subjected to 15 years of relentless Florida sun, intense ultraviolet degradation, and high humidity.
Which just cooks the materials.
It really does. It breaks down the adhesives and the structural integrity of the materials far faster than it would in, say, a northern temperate climate. The insurance carriers, backed by these massive global reinsurance firms, have just drawn a hard mathematical line in the sand.
They're looking at the statistical probability of failure.
Exactly. At 15 years, their risk models dictate that the probability of that roof failing, either failing to keep water out or failing to stay attached to the house during a high wind event, crosses a threshold they're no longer willing to underwrite at a standard rate. So your absolute dream home with a 16-year-old roof becomes effectively uninsurable. Or, if you can find a carrier of last resort, the premium becomes so astronomically high that you can no longer afford the monthly payment.
And if you can't afford the insurance payment, your debt-to-income ratio spikes. The mortgage lender sees that you no longer qualify for the loan because the lender requires the asset to be insured to protect their collateral.
Right.
The lender pulls the funding. The entire house of cards collapses because of some aging shingles.
That is the exact anatomy of a dead deal in this market. The 15-year rule isn't a suggestion, it is a rigid barrier to entry.
But the authors don't just leave you with that doom and gloom. They provide a really vital structural piece of advice to combat this volatility. They tell buyers they must actively hunt for homes that possess specific wind mitigation features.
Yes, wind mitigation is everything.
And they list 3 critical ones: hurricane straps, impact windows, and the shape of the roof itself, specifically a hip roof. They know the data from the Florida Office of Insurance Regulation proves that premiums are significantly lower for structures hardened with these specific features.
They are essentially telling you to look for a house that is engineered to deflect and withstand aerodynamic trauma.
Let's break those down, because understanding the mechanics here is fascinating. Hurricane straps make intuitive sense. You are physically strapping the wooden roof trusses to the concrete block walls with galvanized steel.
Right. You are creating what engineers call a continuous load path. Instead of the roof just resting on top of the walls via gravity and some nails, the hurricane straps transfer the lifting force of the wind from the roof down through the walls and directly into the foundation.
It turns the house from a collection of separate parts into a single, anchored, continuous unit,
Exactly.
and then impact windows. Now, these aren't just thick glass, right?
No, impact windows are a marvel of engineering. They utilize a layer of polyvinyl butyryl or PVB sandwiched between two layers of glass.
Okay, so it's laminated.
Right. Even if a piece of flying debris hits the window at 150 miles an hour and shatters the glass, the PVB inner layer holds all those shattered pieces together in the frame. The envelope of the home remains sealed.
Which is critical, because if a window blows out during a hurricane, the wind rushes into the house, creates massive internal pressurization, and literally blows the roof off from the inside out.
It acts like a balloon popping. It's devastating. But the most interesting wind mitigation feature the source emphasizes is the architectural shape of the roof itself.
The hip roof.
Yes.
The guide specifically defines a hip roof as a roof that slopes downward on all four sides. But why does the geometry of the roof matter so much to an insurance actuary that it can save a buyer thousands of dollars every single year?
Well, to understand this, we really have to look at aerodynamics and Bernoulli's principle.
Uh-oh, bringing in the physics.
Just a little bit. Consider a standard gable roof. This is the classic quintessential house shape that a kid would draw, a triangle resting on a square. It has two sloping sides and two flat vertical ends, which are the gables.
Right, the flat triangles on the ends of the house right under the peak of the roof.
Exactly. Now, when hurricane force winds hit the flat vertical surface of a gable end, it acts exactly like a sail on a boat. The wind hits that massive flat wall and has absolutely nowhere to deflect.
So it just pushes against it.
Right. It creates immense direct pressure against the structure. But the real danger is what happens as the wind sweeps over the top peak of the gable. As the wind accelerates over the ridge, it creates an area of extremely low pressure above the roof.
It's aerodynamic uplift. It functions exactly like an airplane wing.
Precisely. The high pressure inside the house combined with that severe low pressure above the roof creates a massive lifting force. The physics of the storm are literally trying to suck the gable roof right off the walls.
That is terrifying.
It is. Now compare that aerodynamic nightmare to a hip roof,
where all four sides slope downward from the peak toward the exterior walls. So there are no flat gables at all.
Right. There are no flat vertical ends for the wind to catch. It is essentially an aerodynamic dome. No matter which direction the hurricane winds are blowing from, they encounter a sloped, aerodynamic surface that forces the wind to deflect up and over the structure smoothly.
Wow.
It drastically reduces the direct wind load, and it significantly mitigates that aerodynamic uplift that destroys gable roofs.
That is incredible. So the insurance companies aren't looking at a hip roof as like a nice architectural aesthetic. They view it as a scientifically proven survival mechanism.
Yes. They look at a gable roof and see a giant sail waiting to be ripped apart, and they look at a hip roof and see a bunker.
And when the guide tells you to prioritize this, they are talking about the basic math of affordability. The thousands of dollars you save annually on insurance because you found a house with a hip roof, impact windows, and hurricane straps that can literally be the difference between affording a mortgage in Arlington Park and being completely priced out of Sarasota County.
Absolutely. And that means as a buyer, you have to completely rewire your brain when you pull up to an open house.
Right. You can't just walk in the front door and admire the kitchen island or the natural light. You have to stand in the driveway, evaluate the geometry of the roof lines, demand to know the exact installation date of the shingles, and physically inspect the window frames for the impact rating etchings in the corners of the glass.
You must evaluate the house as a fortress first and a home second.
And that transition in mindset is exactly what the authors push in the next phase of their playbook. Because once you've confirmed the aerodynamic viability of the exterior, you have to investigate the invisible internal systems of the home.
Yes, they demand that buyers look far past the surface level presentation.
Which brings us to the anatomy of a Sarasota home, and specifically, looking beyond the staging. The source delivers a very blunt, memorable warning here. They say, don't fall in love with the staging. Furniture leaves, the floor plan stays.
It is brilliant advice for any real estate transaction, honestly, but it is absolutely critical in a hyper-competitive, high-velocity market.
Why is it so dangerous there?
Because when you only have a 15-minute window to tour a property that already has 3 other offers on the table, it is incredibly easy to be seduced by professional staging.
The perfectly placed mid-century modern sofa.
Right, the strategic use of mirrors to make a room feel larger, the bright white paint, the smell of fresh cookies, all of it is highly engineered to bypass your analytical brain and trigger an emotional response.
You know, the analogy that comes to mind here is that touring a professionally staged house is exactly like modern dating.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. Everyone is putting their absolute best, highly curated foot forward. The staging is the flawlessly lit, expertly angled profile picture on a dating app. It's designed to get you to swipe right.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually buying the house, that is like marriage. And the guide correctly points out that what makes a marriage actually survive over the long haul aren't the decorative throw pillows, it's the core values, it's the bonds.
And in this specific market, they tell buyers to hunt for 2 very unsexy structural core values.
Right. Copper wiring instead of aluminum, and PVC plumbing instead of cast iron.
The dating versus marriage analogy is perfectly apt here. The staging is temporary and superficial. The plumbing and electrical systems are permanent, or at least they are permanent until they fail catastrophically and bankrupt you.
The source is basically demanding that buyers shift from being passive aesthetic consumers to active structural investigators.
Yes.
But I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
How's a stressed out, overwhelmed first-time buyer realistically supposed to spot aluminum wiring or degrading cast iron plumbing during a crowded Sunday open house? I mean, the walls are closed, the plumbing is under the floor. It feels like asking a buyer to have X-ray vision.
It does feel daunting, I agree. But it doesn't require X-ray vision. It requires historical context and critical deduction, which is exactly what the source is hinting at.
Okay, walk me through that.
Let's go back to Arlington Park, that neighborhood we discussed with the highly desirable 1950s and 60s bungalows.
The hipster coffee shop neighborhood.
Exactly. If you are touring a home built during that specific era or even into the early 1970s, and the listing description does not explicitly state, in writing, that the plumbing and electrical systems have been completely updated, you must operate under the assumption that those older, hazardous materials are present.
Because aluminum and cast iron were the gold standard building materials of that specific era.
Exactly. Let's look at the electrical first. Aluminum wiring was heavily used in residential construction in the late 1960s and early 1970s because the price of copper skyrocketed. Builders needed a cheaper conductive material.
Okay, but aluminum conducts electricity, right? What's the problem?
The problem isn't that aluminum can't conduct electricity. The problem is the physics of thermal expansion.
Thermal expansion.
Yeah, aluminum expands and contracts with changes in temperature at a significantly higher rate than copper does.
So every time electricity flows through the wire and generates a little bit of heat, the aluminum expands, and when the current stops, it cools and contracts.
Right. And over years and decades, that constant microscopic expansion and contraction at the connection points, like where the wire connects to the back of a light switch or a wall outlet, causes those connections to slowly loosen.
Yeah, that sounds bad.
It's terrible. When an electrical connection becomes loose, it creates a tiny gap. Electricity tries to jump that gap, which is called arcing. Arcing creates intense, localized heat.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, as the aluminum wire is exposed to the air through that loose connection, it oxidizes. Aluminum oxide is highly resistive to electricity, which creates even more heat. Eventually, that heat ignites the surrounding drywall or insulation. It is a massive, well-documented fire hazard.
That is terrifying. So you are looking at a beautifully painted wall, but behind it is a loose oxidizing wire slowly building up heat every single time you turn on the living room lights.
Exactly.
Okay, what about the plumbing? Why the specific dire warning against cast iron in favor of PVC?
The guide gives us the foundational clue when it specifically names the invisible, relentless enemy of Sarasota real estate: the humidity. They state Sarasota is beautiful, but the humidity is relentless on building materials.
Yeah, Florida is an environment defined by moisture. It's a coastal, subtropical ecosystem.
Precisely. Now, cast iron pipes were utilized as the primary material for residential sewer lines for decades. Inherently, cast iron is incredibly strong and durable, but it possesses a fatal flaw when placed in a high humidity, high moisture, high salt environment like coastal Florida.
Let me guess, it rusts.
It rusts. And critically, it doesn't just rust from the wet soil on the outside, it corrodes from the inside out.
Because of the wastewater.
Because of the chemical reaction happening inside the pipe. As wastewater flows through a cast iron sewer line, it releases hydrogen sulfide gas. That gas mixes with the constant condensation inside the pipe to form a mild sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid inside your pipes.
Yes. And over 40 or 50 years, which is exactly the age of those coveted Arlington Park bungalows, that acid slowly eats away at the iron, specifically channeling along the bottom of the pipe. The iron flakes off layer by layer until the bottom of the pipe becomes paper thin and eventually just rots away completely into the soil.
So the pipe essentially loses its floor.
Yes. And once the bottom rots out, the sewage begins leaking directly into the soil beneath the house. Roots from massive oak trees seek out that moisture, infiltrate the broken pipe, and create massive blockages. Suddenly, your plumbing backs up into your bathtubs.
Oh, gross. So a buyer could walk into a beautifully flipped 1950s house. It has a brand new kitchen, waterfall quartz countertops, luxury vinyl plank flooring throughout. It looks like a magazine cover.
Yes.
But if the flipper only updated the cosmetics and didn't replace the cast iron sewer lines buried under the slab, you are buying a beautifully decorated ticking time bomb.
An incredibly expensive ticking time bomb. Because in Florida, houses are generally built on solid concrete slabs. There are no basements or crawl spaces to easily access the plumbing.
Oh, right. You can't just climb under the house.
No. To replace a failed cast iron sewer line, a plumbing crew has to come into your home, bring in jackhammers, and cut a trench directly through your foundation, destroying those brand new luxury floors you just paid a premium for just to reach the dirt and lay new pipe.
That is insane.
It is a massively disruptive process that can easily cost tens of thousands of dollars. The source is telling you to look for PVC plumbing because PVC is a plastic polymer. It does not rust, it does not corrode, it is entirely immune to the sulfuric acid and the relentless Florida humidity.
This completely revolutionizes how you have to read a real estate listing. I mean, when a listing proudly declares fully renovated, you have to stop and ask, did they renovate the skin or did they renovate the bones?
Exactly.
Did they just put lipstick on a pig or did they actually pull permits to replace the cast iron with PVC and the aluminum wiring with copper? If the seller cannot provide documented proof that the structural systems were modernized, you have to mentally deduct $30,000 from your offer to account for that massive future liability.
And that level of forensic structural investigation is exactly what the authors of this guide, a distressed property firm, do every single day.
Right.
They make their living buying homes from people who had no idea they had cast iron pipes until raw sewage backed up into their living room, and suddenly they couldn't afford the $30,000 trenching repair. So they were forced to sell the distressed asset for cash at a deep discount.
Wow. So the authors are literally handing you the map to avoid the traps that they profit from. They are trying to save the first-time buyer from becoming their future distressed client.
It's beautifully honest, really.
That is a brilliant point. The sheer honesty of that is incredible. So let's assume you successfully navigated this minefield. You've done the work. You found the house.
Okay.
It's in Palmer Ranch. It has a 3-year-old aerodynamic hip roof, fully rated impact windows, continuous load path hurricane straps, PVC plumbing under the slab, and modern copper wiring in the walls.
The unicorn.
You have found the fortress. You check every single box. Now, you enter what the source material indicates is the most stressful, aggressive phase of all. The feeding frenzy of the offer.
Oh, yeah. Finding the structurally sound home is only like 10% of the battle in a high-velocity market. The other 90% is actually beating the 5 other buyers to the closing table.
And this requires a complete shift from evaluation into aggressive execution. The guide outlines highly tactical maneuvers required regarding speed, cash, and contingencies.
And again, we must consider the source. Because they are a cash-buying firm that specializes in rapid transactions, they see the winning side of a bidding war constantly.
They're the ones beating the traditional families to the punch.
Right. And their golden rule for winning an offer is a very clear hierarchy. Cash is king, but speed is queen.
Okay, but if you are a typical first-time buyer or a young family, you likely do not have $500,000 in liquid cash sitting in a checking account to deploy. You are reliant on financing the home through a mortgage lender.
And the guide addresses this systemic disadvantage directly. They state unequivocally that being merely pre-qualified for a loan is a completely worthless piece of paper to a listing agent in a competitive market.
A worthless piece of paper. That is strong, definitive language. What is the fundamental mechanical difference between being pre-qualified and being pre-approved? And why does the guide specifically demand that a buyer obtain a desktop underwriting, or DU approval, before ever making an offer?
It comes down to the mechanics of verification and the deep-seated psychology of the seller.
Okay.
A pre-qualification is essentially a surface-level, unverified estimate. You go online, you fill out a 5-minute web form, you tell a lender your gross income, your estimated monthly debts, and what you think your credit score is.
Just self-reported data.
Exactly. Based entirely on your unverified word, the lender's automated system spits out a letter saying, sure, based on what you told us, it looks like you could probably borrow this much money. Nobody has looked at your actual tax returns. Nobody has pulled your hard credit report. Nobody has verified your bank statements to ensure you actually have the down payment funds you claim to have.
It's essentially a financial honor system. It's a polite guess.
Right. And to a seller in a hyper-competitive market who has 3 other offers sitting on their kitchen counter,
Yeah.
a pre-qualification represents a massive, unacceptable level of risk.
Because what if the buyer lied?
Exactly. What if they lied about their income? What if they forgot to mention a massive auto loan? What if their credit score is actually 50 points lower than they thought?
So the seller accepts the offer, takes the house off the market, and then 3 weeks later, when the bank's underwriter finally looks at the actual paperwork, the loan is denied.
And the deal falls apart.
And the text explicitly mentions closing reliability as one of the major friction points in real estate transactions. Sellers fear friction, uncertainty, and delays above absolutely all else.
Right. A seller wants a guarantee. So the guide dictates that you must be fully pre-approved, ideally with a desktop underwriting or DU approval.
What is desktop underwriting exactly?
Desktop underwriting is a highly sophisticated automated risk assessment algorithm used by major mortgage backers, primarily Fannie Mae.
Okay.
When a buyer possesses a DU approval, it means the lender hasn't just taken their word for it. The lender has already collected the buyer's W-2s, their past 2 years of tax returns, their recent bank statements, and they have executed a hard pull on their credit report.
They have all the receipts.
They have everything. The lender takes all of that verified, hard data and runs it through Fannie Mae's algorithmic risk model. If the algorithm determines the borrower meets all guidelines, it issues an official DU approval.
So you have fundamentally already completed the hardest, most rigorous part of the mortgage underwriting process before you even step foot in the house to make the offer.
Precisely. You have removed the uncertainty. A DU approval mathematically bridges the trust gap between you, the financed buyer, and the all-cash buyer.
Because it's basically guaranteed money.
Exactly. The listing agent can look at your DU approval, call your lender, and know that your financing is a statistical near certainty. It removes the friction. It proves you have been vetted by the algorithm. It gives you, as the guide phrases it, actual skin in the game.
Okay, so securing the DU approval neutralizes the cash buyer's advantage on the financing front. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But then the guide moves to contingency strategy, and this part, man, it made me legitimately sweat just reading it.
The inspection window.
Yes.
Yeah.
They discuss the inspection contingency. Now, to their credit, they explicitly state that waiving a home inspection entirely is reckless and financially suicidal for a first-time buyer.
And they are absolutely correct. I mean, given the granular structural deep dive we just did regarding aging roofs, hidden aluminum wiring, and rotting cast iron pipes under the slab, waiving your right to inspect the property is asking for bankruptcy.
Right. But their specific tactic to win the bidding war is to drastically shorten the inspection window. Typically, a standard real estate contract allows a buyer 10 to 15 days to complete their due diligence and get their inspectors through the house.
Right, 2 weeks is standard.
But the guide advises offering an aggressively compressed window of just 5 to 7 days. This signals serious intent to the seller. But I have to push back here. Isn't shortening an inspection to a 5-day sprint incredibly risky for a stressed-out first-time buyer?
It sounds like it, yeah.
Aren't we inviting a catastrophic oversight just to look attractive to a seller? I mean, how in the world do you practically coordinate a general inspector, a master plumber with a fiber optic camera to scope the sewer lines, a licensed electrician, and a roofing contractor to evaluate the property in a span of 120 hours?
Your reaction is exactly why this tactic works. Most buyers are too disorganized to pull it off. But this raises a fundamental point about the difference between passive shopping and active market preparation. Yes, a 5-day inspection window is highly stressful. Yes, it is aggressive, but that is the defining characteristic of a high-velocity market.
Right.
You cannot wait until your offer is miraculously accepted on a Friday afternoon to open your laptop and start Googling reputable plumbers in Sarasota.
I see. You have to have your entire team built and on standby before you even draft the offer.
Exactly. I look at this through a medical analogy. A standard 15-day inspection period is like scheduling a comprehensive annual physical checkup. You make an appointment, you take your time, you get a broad overview of your health.
Very relaxed.
Right. A 5-day inspection period is triage. It is an emergency room assessment. Before you even submit the contract, your real estate agent should have their trusted general inspector on speed dial. You should know exactly which plumbing company you're going to hire to run the camera down the sewer line.
You have them pre-warned that you are submitting offers.
Yes. The 5-day window isn't a recommendation to do less due diligence. It is a tactical, logistical maneuver to prove to the seller that you are a highly organized, highly motivated buyer who will not drag their feet.
It all routes back to the psychology of the seller's momentum. If I am selling my house, a 15-day inspection contingency means my property is locked up and off the market for over 2 weeks.
Which feels like an eternity in this market.
Right. If the buyer gets cold feet or finds a minor issue and backs out on day 14, I have lost 2 entire weeks of market momentum. My listing has grown stale.
Buyers wonder what's wrong with it.
Exactly. A 5-day inspection period guarantees the seller that if the deal's going to fall apart, it will fall apart rapidly, and they can immediately pivot to the next backup offer without losing their position in the market. Speed is queen.
You are offering the seller the ultimate luxury. Peace of mind and rapid resolution in exchange for your offer being chosen over someone else's.
Okay, so you execute the playbook flawlessly. You navigate the 15-year roof rule. You verify the PVC plumbing via a scope during your frantic 5-day inspection triage.
You survive the ER.
You beat out the cash buyers because your DU approval proved your closing reliability. You sign the closing documents, and the agent hands you the keys. You might feel like you finally crossed the finish line and survived the battlefield.
But you haven't. The guide makes a very sobering pivot here. They make it abundantly clear that securing the winning bid is merely the conclusion of the acquisition phase.
Right.
The daily reality of actually living in Sarasota County holds its own set of deeply hidden logistical trade-offs.
This brings us to the hidden logistics of the terrain. This is where we examine the friction points of navigating the county day to day. And the first major logistical anchor they identify, which drives so much of this market's velocity, are the schools.
Ah, yes, the schools.
The guide notes that Sarasota County schools are consistently A-rated, which, as we established, is a primary magnet for the influx of young families.
It is arguably the central gravitational force for that demographic. But the text adds a crucial granular layer of nuance. They state that school choice is a factor, and they specifically name-drop 2 highly coveted zones, Southside Elementary and Philippi Shores.
And they state that the intense, localized demand for these specific schools artificially drives up the real estate values in those immediate surrounding neighborhoods.
This is a textbook example of a real estate microeconomy. In a market driven by young families, the quality of the hyperlocal school zone completely decouples the value of the home from its physical attributes.
How does it work in practice?
Well, you could look at 2 houses built in the exact same year, with the exact same square footage, the exact same hip roof, and identical modern updates.
Identical twins.
Right. But if House A is zoned for the highly prestigious Southside Elementary, and House B is located just 1 mile away but falls into a school zone with a slightly lower rating, House A will command a massive, disproportionate price premium. The buyers in that transaction are no longer just paying for the physical structure of the house. They are paying a steep admission fee to guarantee access to that specific public school district.
Which forces first-time buyers to make a painful logistical choice. Do you sacrifice the size of the home, perhaps settling for a smaller, older 2-bedroom house just to squeeze into the Philippi Shores zone?
Right.
Or do you seek out a much larger, newer house further out east and figure out the educational logistics later?
And if you make the choice to seek more space and buy further out east, say, in the massive developments of Lakewood Ranch or stretching past the interstate along Fruitville Road, you slam directly into the next hidden logistical nightmare the guide warns about.
The seasonal traffic trap.
The seasonal traffic trap.
Oh man, the traffic warning in this material is incredibly visceral. They state, plainly and without exaggeration, that the winter months change the physical reality of the county. A breezy 15-minute commute to downtown in the middle of July can easily devolve into a grueling 45-minute crawl in February.
It is the ultimate manifestation of infrastructure strain caused by a seasonal population. In the winter months, the population of coastal Florida swells drastically.
The snowbirds.
Yes, you have an influx of wealthy retirees, snowbirds escaping the freezing temperatures up north, and international tourists. The roads, the bridges, the intersections, and even the grocery store aisles. The physical infrastructure simply wasn't engineered to handle that peak capacity smoothly.
The advice they give to buyers regarding this is so brilliantly practical. They say if you work a job in downtown Sarasota, but you are looking to buy a house out east, you must physically test drive the route at 8 a.m. on a weekday.
Yes.
And my absolute favorite line in the entire playbook is their warning about technology. Do not trust your GPS time estimate. I actually laughed out loud when I read that.
It is so true, though.
Because relying on Apple Maps or Google Maps to predict your commute in Sarasota in February is basically like relying on a weather forecast from 3 weeks ago. It is fundamentally mathematically disconnected from the current reality on the ground.
It is a profound failure of the predictive algorithms.
Why do they fail so badly?
Because the GPS algorithms are designed to measure distance and average speed limits. What they deeply struggle to account for is the sheer density of vehicles and the, well, let's generously call it highly variable driving behaviors of a diverse, seasonal, often older population converging simultaneously with stressed-out local commuters trying to get their kids to school and get to the office.
A total mess.
If a buyer tours a home in August, checks their GPS, sees a 20-minute commute, and buys the house based on that data, they are in for a huge shock. Suddenly, in February, they are spending an hour and a half trapped in their car every single day. Their overall quality of life plummets.
The guide is actively trying to save the buyer from massive, irreversible buyer's remorse.
Exactly.
They are synthesizing all these disparate points, the school zones, the geographical sprawl, the seasonal influx, into a cohesive picture of local infrastructure. The influx of seasonal residents directly impact the young working families out east on Fruitville Road trying to get downtown. Everything is interconnected.
And speaking of interconnected elements, the guide highlights several other hidden financial burdens that buyers must actively budget for beyond just the mortgage payment and the sky-high property insurance.
Right.
They explicitly mention potential flood insurance requirements and CDD fees in those newer manicured communities like Palmer Ranch.
Let's clearly define those, because they're massive budget busters. Flood insurance is generally mandated by the mortgage lender if the property is located within specific FEMA-designated flood zones, like Zone A or Zone AE. That is a federal requirement, and it is entirely separate from your standard homeowner's wind and hazard policy.
Right, two separate policies.
But what exactly is a CDD fee? They specifically tie this financial burden to those master planned communities like Palmer Ranch that we praised earlier for their amenities.
Yes, CDD stands for Community Development District. It is essentially a localized micro-municipal tax, and understanding how it works is crucial for a buyer's long-term budget.
How does it work?
When a massive developer decides to build a sprawling community like Palmer Ranch out of raw land, they have to install an immense amount of infrastructure. They have to pave miles of roads, lay down massive water and sewer lines, build the clubhouses, and install those beautiful community pools the guide mentioned.
Infrastructure is incredibly expensive.
Prohibitively expensive. So instead of the developer paying for all of those tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure up front out of their own pocket, the developer establishes a CDD.
Okay.
The CDD is legally allowed to issue municipal bonds to raise the capital needed to build the roads and the pools. The cost of paying back those municipal bonds over 20 or 30 years, plus the ongoing maintenance of that infrastructure, is then passed directly onto the homeowners in the form of an annual CDD fee, which is added directly to their county property tax bill.
Oh, wow. So you are fundamentally paying off the developer's construction debt. You might find a house in Palmer Ranch that seems mathematically perfect. The list price fits your parameters.
Yeah.
But when you factor in the monthly HOA fee, the elevated property insurance for the wind mitigation, the potential flood insurance, and then this hidden CDD municipal bond tax, your actual monthly carrying cost could be radically higher than the simple mortgage estimate you got from your lender.
Exactly. It is the hidden cost of the suburban heavyweight. The manicured sidewalks, the reliable streetlights, and the pristine community pools are not free. You are financing them for decades.
The final logistical warning in the guide is directed squarely at people who decide to bypass the older neighborhoods entirely and look at brand new construction. And it addresses a very specific, deeply ingrained power dynamic.
Yes, the model home warning.
The FAQ section of the guide asks a simple question. Do I need a real estate agent to buy a new construction home? And the guide's answer is an emphatic Non-negotiable, absolutely.
This is perhaps the most critical warning regarding fiduciary leverage in the entire document. The guide explicitly states the sales representative at the model home works for the builder, not you.
This feels so important to highlight because it exposes the psychological trap of the model home. I mean, when you walk into a beautifully staged, new construction model home, the environment is designed to totally disarm you.
Oh, they are beautiful.
The sales representative is usually incredibly friendly, highly polished, accommodating. They offer you bottled water, they walk you through the glossy floor plans, they point out the upgraded cabinets. They make the entire purchasing process seem so seamless and easy. It feels intuitively like they are helping you navigate a complex process.
It is the carefully crafted illusion of the helpful guide. But you must understand the legal reality of the relationship. Their fiduciary duty, their legal and ethical obligation, is to maximize the profit and protect the liability of the developer who signs their paycheck.
Right, not you.
They are not there to negotiate the best possible price for you. They are not going to quietly advise you that the specific lot you chose has a history of poor drainage during heavy summer rains.
They definitely won't tell you that.
And they are not going to point out that the builder's contract heavily penalizes you if your financing is delayed, but offers you zero recourse if the builder delays construction for 8 months due to supply chain issues.
That is a massive asymmetry of power. The text explicitly says that an independent agent protects your interests, negotiates incentives like closing cost credits, and ensures the terms of the deal are fair. You need independent advocacy because the builder's contract is written by a team of corporate lawyers to protect the builder at all costs, not the buyer.
It all comes down to leverage. A first-time homebuyer walking into a model home has absolutely zero leverage and zero structural knowledge against a massive regional or national home builder.
That makes perfect sense.
An experienced, independent real estate agent brings market knowledge, contract comprehension, and negotiation leverage to the table. They act as a shield against that power dynamic.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground here. We have mapped the topography from the sprawling master plan communities to the fast-moving urban infill. We have explored the physics of aerodynamic roof geometry. We have inspected the chemical degradation of cast iron plumbing. We've unpacked the algorithmic risk models of desktop underwriting, and we've navigated the municipal bond structures of community fees.
It is a lot to process.
It is. But looking at all of these disparate, highly complex elements leads us to the final, overarching philosophy of the market, outlined by the authors.
Right. The outro of the guide really brings all of these technical details together by explaining the core why behind the source material. Why does a firm that specializes in buying distressed properties for cash monitor these traditional retail market trends so obsessively?
They articulate it beautifully with a single phrase. Fluidity is the lifeblood of the market.
I love that phrase.
They understand that a real estate ecosystem requires constant, predictable movement to survive and function healthily. Growing families eventually need the older retirees to downsize and move into smaller condos.
Right.
When the retirees downsize, it releases that crucial entry-level or mid-tier single-family inventory back into the wild for the young families to purchase.
Yeah.
And the authors of this guide facilitate that vital liquidity, whether they are buying a distressed inherited property with a rotting roof for cash, or providing the strategic roadmap for a family trying to secure their forever home.
They are the mechanics keeping the gears of the market turning.
And their ultimate piece of advice is perhaps the most sobering, pragmatic truth for anyone trying to time the market or outsmart the economy. They note that while data from Florida realtors indicates a slight shift towards stabilization in inventory levels, the underlying prices remain incredibly resilient.
The demand still massively outpaces the viable, insurable supply.
Yeah, their final verdict on market timing is super blunt. Waiting for a crash might leave you renting for another 3 years. The best time to buy is when you can afford the monthly payment, regardless of the headlines.
It is a purely mathematical, highly pragmatic approach. They are telling buyers to stop trying to outsmart a global macroeconomic trend. If you have done the deep structural due diligence, if the monthly payment, including the mortgage, the elevated wind insurance, the CDD bond fees, and the property taxes fits comfortably within your verified budget, and the home meets your family's logistical needs for the next 5 to 10 years, you execute the play. You move forward.
Pull the trigger.
Trying to sit on the sidelines and wait for a catastrophic 2008-style housing crash in a coastal market characterized by finite buildable land and massive, sustained inward migration is just a historically losing bet.
That really brings it all back to you. Think about your own local real estate market, wherever you are, whatever city you live in. Are you falling into the traps this guide outlines? Are you prioritizing the glossy staging and the quartz countertops over the invisible, aging plumbing beneath the slab?
It's a great question.
Are you entering the battlefield armed merely with an unverified pre-qualification form, or are you aggressively pre-approved with hard data? Are you moving with the conviction and the speed required in a high-velocity environment? This playbook from a distressed property firm in Sarasota isn't just a local guide. It is a universal blueprint for defensive, highly intelligent home buying anywhere.
It truly is. It forces a complete recalibration of how we value property. And as we synthesize all of these incredibly specific, highly technical local details, the absolute obsession with the 15-year roof rule, the mathematical necessity of aerodynamic wind mitigation, the specific materials required to withstand a hostile environment, it leaves me with a lingering, provocative thought about the broader future of real estate at large.
Let's hear it. What's the macro takeaway?
Well, if environmental realities and highly volatile, actuary-driven insurance premiums continue to rigidly dictate real estate viability in coastal places like Sarasota, will the future definition of a luxury home shift entirely?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. Will buyers in the near future stop caring so much about Italian marble countertops, custom home theaters, or high-end aesthetic staging? Will they instead define true luxury simply as having a one-year-old aerodynamic hip roof, fully rated polyvinyl impact windows, and a completely undeniably insurable structure? Does raw survival become the new luxury?
That is a fascinating concept. When the global reinsurance market dictates the terms of your local 30-year mortgage, the interior aesthetics absolutely have to take a back seat. The fortified aerodynamic bunker becomes the ultimate status symbol because it's the only asset you can actually afford to insure and keep.
Precisely. The definition of value shifts from beauty to resilience.
So the next time you find yourself driving down a street on a Sunday morning, looking at the neighborhood, maybe watching the construction crane swing overhead as the city transforms, remember that the postcard view is just the surface.
It's just the staging.
Exactly. You're looking at a highly complex, fast-moving battlefield. Arm yourself with the right knowledge. Inspect the bones, calculate the logistics, ignore the staging, and when you finally find the right aerodynamic fortress, move with absolute conviction. That's it for our deep dive today. Thanks for joining us.